Most people would tell you that attaining 7 ratings in 3 months was not only impossible, but it was actually even foolish to attempt. And I'm here to tell you that I could not disagree more. Hey, everybody, my name is Trent. I'm a 53-year-old guy who's decided to become an airline pilot after 30 years of owning businesses. And starting in May of this year, I enrolled in an accelerated flight training program. And over a period of just 91 days, I was able to earn 7 ratings right the way from private pilot, instrument, commercial, multi-engine, CFI, CFII, and MEI, and little asterisk, I did have 100 hours and a Canadian private pilot's license from way back in the 90s, but I hadn't flown in like 20 years when I embarked on this 91-day sprint that I'm referring to. So having become something of an unwitting poster child for accelerated flight training thanks to the success of the videos about it on my topic, in today's video, I want to share with you why I believe that for the vast majority of people, maybe not for everybody, but for the vast majority of people, accelerated flight training is actually the very best way to go. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick with me because we're going to dive into it and unpack it all right here in this very video. So what is accelerated flight training anyway? Well, put simply, it just means that you fly more often. It's not really any fancier than that. It doesn't mean taking shortcuts or cramming or doing anything that would be counterproductive to your flying or to safety. It just means that you're in the cockpit more often, and when you're not in the cockpit, you're studying ground school. So now that we've defined what I call accelerated flight training, I'd like to share with you 8 reasons why I think it is so very beneficial for the vast majority of student pilots. So my very first reason is the importance of consistency. I think that most people would tell you that if you're training for anything, be it, golf or dancing or driving or whatever, doing the activity more consistently rather, is going to be far more beneficial than doing it just once or maybe twice a week. The same applies to flying. The more consistently you fly, the faster you're going to develop your skills because you're going to be exposing yourself to being in the cockpit nearly every day. And when you aren't in the cockpit, you're going to be studying ground school. And that consistency is crucial for building and retaining skills in any activity, and obviously the same applies for flying. For example, during my 91-day flight training sprint, I was in the cockpit 1 to 2 flights a day, and then in between those flights, I would usually squeeze in a ride in the simulator, and then with any free time that I had left, I would pull out the textbooks and I would study ground school. So thanks to my total and complete immersion in the world of flying, I was able to make progress incredibly quickly, and that's the main reason why I was able to earn 7 ratings in just 91 days. And while it's true, I did spend a lot of money in those 91 days, I actually saved money overall because I was able to become proficient in the minimum amount of hours that are required by the FAA versus the amount of time that the average Joe takes to become proficient flying just 1 to 2 days per week. So in other words, fly a lot in a short period of time, and the overall number of hours that you need is going to be much less than the guy or the gal that is flying infrequently over a much longer period of time. So it really does make a lot of sense to compress your flying into the shortest amount of time possible. So one of the main reasons that I was able to become proficient so quickly was thanks to flying every day. I had almost zero skill decay. In other words, I didn't forget stuff. So if you compare this to the student pilot who maybe flies 1 or 2 days a week, here's what you'll discover. If they are flying inconsistently, they're going to forget a good chunk of what they're learning from lesson to lesson to lesson. And that means they're going to need to fly a lot more lessons to achieve whatever rating it is that they're working on. So, for example, if you're practicing steep turns or maybe instrument approaches, and you're doing that maybe just once per week or maybe twice, how on earth are you going to remember it all? Especially, for example, instrument approaches, which is a highly technical skill. The reality is, it's going to be quite difficult for you to remember it because you're just not doing it often enough. So, if you take a student like me who's flying every day, or even multiple times per day, retention actually becomes substantially easier because you're never really out of the cockpit long enough to forget anything that you're learning. And obviously, that's highly beneficial to your overall training goals. So I believe that a pilot that lacks currency, in other words, they don't fly very often, is actually a dangerous pilot. And that's yet one of the other reasons why I'm such a big fan of accelerated flight training. In fact, during our CFI training, we are taught about these things called the laws of learning. And one of these laws is the law of recency, which basically says whatever you learn most recently is the thing that you best retain. So the more consistently that a student pilot flies, the more often they're in the cockpit and the more often they have the opportunity to practice emergency procedures like landings and simulated engine outs and so forth. And that means that should a real emergency ever show up, these pilots who are flying more consistently are also going to have a much higher degree of confidence versus the pilot that has only practiced a given procedure maybe once or twice in the last few months. So again, fly more often, practice more emergency procedures, become a safer pilot. So when it comes to retaining knowledge, I've found that anytime that I'm immersed in a topic, not only do I learn quicker, but I also retain the knowledge much easier and longer because I'm using that knowledge on a day-to-day basis. So for example, one of the areas that I see with my students one of the areas that they struggle is when we're approaching a new airport for the first time, and there's a certain sequence of things that they need to remember to do in order to have a safe approach and landing at that airport. For example, tuning in the weather when you're 20 miles away, then listening to if there's a common traffic advisory frequency, listening to that frequency. Those two things are really to help you figure out, well, what runway am I going to land on? And then once you know the runway you're going to land on, you need to figure out your pattern entry procedure. And depending upon, the height of the runway and whatever altitude you're at, you need to figure out a descent plan so that you actually get down in time to be able to land on the runway. Because as I like to joke with my student pilots, the airport is not going to fly up to you. You need to fly down to it. And I see student pilots struggling with this all the time. So do you think that they would struggle as much if they're flying into 1 to 2 airports every single day over and over and over again? Well, no, of course not. And so I think the whole idea of knowledge retention is actually one of the best reasons to do accelerated flight training. And speaking of studying, if you click probably somewhere around here, you can watch a video that explains the process that I developed to cram all of the knowledge and retain all of the knowledge into my head for all of the oral exams that were a part of each check ride. So when it comes to learning, focus is critical. But with that said, distractions are a part of your everyday life and they're going to be a part of your flying as well. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take every measure possible to reduce or eliminate those distractions as much as possible. So for example, when I was in that 91-day sprint of flight training, as I've mentioned previously, I pretty much put my entire life on hold. I didn't take days off really to do much of anything. I didn't go dirt biking or mountain biking or do any of that stuff. My wife and I, we didn't socialize very much. We pretty much removed ourselves from our entire social circle because we had to relocate to the flight school. We didn't watch a lot of TV, didn't watch a lot of Netflix. Instead, my sole focus was flying and studying flying. Now, I don't mean that I was a robot and that I did nothing else during the 91 days, but I sure did a lot less of the other stuff that is in my life than I would normally do. And that proved to be highly beneficial for me during that training phase. So far we've been talking about accelerated flight training and how it helps with safety and retention and focused learning. Well, guess what else it helps with? Optimizing weather opportunities. So when compared to a pilot who's maybe flying only 1 or 2 days a week, the student that is flying every day is going to have a much better time building proficiency when they're training during times of the year when maybe the weather isn't as cooperative as we'd like. So for example, if you have, 1 or maybe 2 flights booked each week and then weather comes along and maybe you have to cancel one or maybe both of those flights, During that week, you got zero training, so you're going to forget a lot of stuff. You're going to go backwards and so forth. But if, on the other hand, you have 5 flights booked every single week, week after week, or maybe even more if you're flying multiple times per day, weather's not going to cancel all of your flights. It might cancel one of them or maybe 2 of them, but that means that in a typical week, you're still going to get to fly quite often, be in the cockpit quite often, and as would come as no great surprise to you, that's going to be far more beneficial for your training than the person who had a flight or maybe 2 flights and maybe 1 or both of those flights got canceled due to weather. Okay, this next section is called Instructor Availability and Personalization. So these days, most flight schools are pretty full, and many of them have wait lists. And in my case, I like to prioritize working with full-time students versus part-time students simply because it's much easier for me to manage a schedule of just 3 to 4 full-time students versus a schedule of 6 to 8 or maybe more part-time students. So this means that the students who are flying with me to do accelerated training are not really likely to get shuffled around to other instructors on a week-to-week basis like oftentimes happens in a traditional flight school. And that means a more consistent schedule for my students and a more consistent learning experience. And if you are interested in flying with me, by the way, on a full-time basis, definitely visit flywithtrent.com and look at the accelerated flight training page, and you'll get a bunch of information about doing just that. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I'm a big believer in accelerated flight training versus flying just once or twice per week. The more often you fly, the less that you're going to forget, and the faster you're going to learn, and the less you will spend on your training overall. And while not everyone can afford to take time off work and immerse themselves into flight training, there are definitely some of the people who are watching this video who can, and for those of you who can, I strongly recommend that you consider taking this approach to achieve your flying goals. And if you decide to dive in with both feet first, I also recommend that you don't just take my word for it, that you actively seek the opinion of other experienced pilots to aid you in making the best decision for you possible. So thank you very much for watching my video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave those right down below in the comments because I read and respond to every comment personally. And if you like this video and would like to express your appreciation to me for making it, I'd love it if you would just click that like button and maybe also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel if this is the first of my videos that you have watched, because I do produce a lot of videos for what I call the Career 2.0 pilot. So thanks very much for watching. We'll see you in another video soon. Take care. Bye-bye.